We are back, and it's time for Definitive Ranking, a recurring segment where we take a Nintendo topic and give our own personal top 5 lists. Since our main segment primarily focused on Fantasia Neo Dimension, which comes from one of the greatest RPG developers of all time, Hironobu Sakaguchi, I wanted to use this week's Definitive Ranking to celebrate the best RPGs on Switch. So, James, I'm going to let you go first. Start at 5, count it down to 1. Give me a quick sentence or two about each.
All right. So I kind of went back and forth on whether I wanted this to be a list of top 5 RPGs for a general audience, people that maybe aren't RPG sickos, or to just go on my personal list. I'm going to go with general audience one. I think
Okay,
that's
well, that's the
probably better.
approach I took, but also my
Yeah.
favorite because I'm more of a general audience kind of guy when it comes to
Yeah.
these RPGs.
So for number 5, I would say Undernaut's Labyrinth of Yomi, which is a dungeon RPG by Experience Inc. They also make the Spirit Hunter series, so like Spirit Hunter Deathmark and Spirit Hunter NG. Uh, the reason I put this at number 5 is I love dungeon RPGs, but it is a subgenre that is hard to recommend for most people. They're very systems heavy, and there's a lot of simpler dungeon RPGs that might be okay, but if I'm trying to get someone into that genre, they're maybe not a good gateway drug.
Mm.
This one kind of hits the balance of there's enough there to get you acclimated to what those more like extensive dungeon RPGs do, but it's not like so overwhelming that it will be completely impenetrable if this is your first. And I just think it's like a really, really good dungeon RPG. Like, just take a look at some of the art and it's like, oh my God. So that's my number 5. Number 4 would be Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak.
Oh,
Uh,
okay, that's one I didn't even think about. That's a good shout out.
Yes, I know some people think, well, is that really an RPG? Ever since World, Capcom themselves have classified them as RPGs, and especially once you get to the end game in Sunbreak and the way that you like build up your characters, like equipment and whatnot, and like build crafting, it's very much like as in depth as like pretty much any other RPG on the market. I love it. I'm more of a fan of like World, but as far as like Switch RPGs go, like even if I have preferences, like Rise with Sunbreak is incredible, and it's one of the best, like not just RPGs, but one of the best games like in general on Switch. Certainly the best looking. Like, I'll say that much.
Awesome.
Number 3 would be Xenoblade Chronicles 3.
Okay.
With Future Redeemed. I love Xenoblade Chronicles in general. Like, I'm super excited for Xenoblade Chronicles Cross Definitive Edition when it comes out early next year. That would be probably my favorite RPG on a Nintendo system at all. But for Switch, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is really good. I love that, at least for the base game. DLC is one thing, something else entirely. But for the base game, you don't have to have played 1 and 2. I would still recommend people play them, but also all 3 of those games are like 70+ hour RPGs. So I completely understand anyone that wouldn't want to play like Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and then Xenoblade Chronicles 2 just to get to Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Thankfully, you don't really have to. You do get some benefits, but by no means it's a requirement. Number 2 would be Octopath Traveler 2. That was an
Oh,
RPG
okay.
that released last year, and I was not a fan of Octopath 1. I was not a fan whatsoever.
I fell
Uh,
off it pretty hard.
but it was a bunch of small changes that altogether really made Octopath 2 probably one of my like top 5 RPGs of the last like decade. I really,
Mm.
really liked it. I think one thing that did it was the day and night cycle, and the fact that every character now has like different path actions depending on day and night. So it meant that you could have different characters that could do the same thing, just like depending on day and night. And there's more of a reason to switch between them because there's like a lot of puzzles that revolve around that day and night cycle, including in side quests. The battle system has seen a few improvements. There's like a limit break type system that, along with the job system, really adds to some like pretty fascinating combinations. Also, I would say that the story itself is a lot better. There's a couple of chapters where the different paths will cross, and then there's a final like conclusion that brings everyone together, and you can see the foreshadowing in each of the different character stories and whatnot. But I loved it a lot. Man, that's a good RPG.
I need to go back to it. I fell off the first one really hard after like probably 5 or 6 hours, and I was like, I don't know. It was fine, but like I've heard nothing but praise for Octopath 2, and I would love to check it out. I think I bought it when it first hit, and
Yeah.
I just never got to it because I think it came out. It was like it was a February release or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, it was like an early like last year release, and last year was, oh man, like it.
Bananas.
I'm gonna be going through my backlog of 2023 releases for the next decade, I'm sure.
Same. I still haven't played Baldur's Gate to completion.
Oh God, yeah. And number one, Disco Elysium, the final cut.
Oh,
I,
interesting.
I would say that is definitely an RPG. I feel like a lot of people don't really consider it one, but it's like a CRPG, classical RPG. I would say that Disco Elysium is probably in my top 5 games of all time. I think is one of the
Whoa.
most important releases of the last, like, well, like I said, top 5 game of all time. I think, ironically enough, everything that surrounded that game's development since it came out, if
It's a
anything,
sad.
is, yeah, it's sad, but it kind of like solidifies the message that game had. It's like the fact that even it was susceptible to the same things it criticizes. It's somber, but as a piece of art, it kind of like almost completes it. Not to say there wasn't like already a complete piece of art before then, but it's one of those games where it's just, I can't recommend it enough. It's life changing media.
Man, yeah, you got me adding it to my wish list now on Switch because I have the Steam version and it's like I could just play that, but I don't know, I always prefer to play on console if I can.
Yeah.
So you got me adding it to my wish list and I'm going to wait for a sale cuz $40 not a terrible price for like you're saying a life-changing piece of media. But when I have so many other games, it's like
Yeah.
I can hold off for now until it's
At least it's
time.
a shorter RPG. Like it's like what, 15, 20 hours, something like that.
Well,
Not too
hey,
bad.
that's doable.
Yeah.
Unlike most of the games on my RPG top five, by the way, before we go into mine, if you did go with like the sicko list, as you put it, what would have been your number one?
Ironically enough, it would have still been Disco Elysium.
Okay, well there we go. Would Fantasian have been on your top five
Yes,
if
along
you went
with
with the
Saga,
sickos?
Scarlet Grace Ambitions, another game I gave a 10 out of 10 that caused a bit of uproar at the time.
Well, hey, there you go. That's all the recommendation you need for Fantasian, especially, and also Disco Elysium, which like I said, is available for $40 on the Switch eShop. My top five is going to be a lot more mainstream and probably a little bit more casual, and quite a few games from the past. Starting with number five, Persona 4 Golden. This was a game that this re-release, remake, updated version, wherever you want to call it, came out on Vita originally. And I remember people being like, "You need to play Persona 4 Golden. If you like RPGs, you need to play Persona 4 Golden." And then I played Persona 4 Golden like the opening hours, and I bounced off of it immediately. And I was just like, I was like 2 hours deep of just like there was one battle that happened. I'm just like reading a novel essentially, and I'm just like, I don't even know if I like this game, and I'm putting in all these hours into this, and then I fell off, and then years later I finally went back. I bought a PlayStation TV, which allowed me to play Vita games up on my TV, and that's how I ultimately made it through Persona 4 Golden, and it's an absolutely incredible game. I'm so happy there are HD versions of it on consoles now, including Switch. And if you like the Persona series and you got into it through 5, you should go back and play P4G because it's also fantastic. Number four, I don't know if this was a launch. I think it was a launch window title, not launch title, but Golf Story. This
Oh
was
yeah, yeah.
a one of the few Switch exclusives that is on this list for me. Don't play Sports Story, which is the sequel to this game, because it stinks. Golf Story, however, is fantastic. It is basically like the mechanics of like the Mario Golf Game Boy Color game.
That's one
And
of the this is one of those RPGs that I really need to get around to, because like probably in my top 3 Game Boy Advance games is Mario Golf Advance Tour, and I completely 100%ed that game. So I know when I eventually get around to it, I'll probably love Golf Story as
and
well.
rather than it just being like, oh yeah, Mario Golf on Game Boy Color has that incredible RPG mode, Golf Story is just the entire RPG mode, right? Like it's just a story-based, story-driven exploration, but also like all of the battles are basically just like, hey, you're going to play in this golf tournament and you have to get this certain score. And it has like the classic kind of Mario Golf like meter gameplay, and then like it expands out to be like, oh well, now you're playing disc golf, and that has an entirely different mechanic. And like I had such high hopes for Sports Story, and it did not meet any of those expectations, and it sounds like there was maybe some troubled development involved with that. But Golf Story hits all the high notes that you would want from a sports-based RPG game with like retro sensibilities. Definitely worth checking out. I believe it's still exclusive to Switch, so it's a perfect pick for this list. Also, a game that's probably going to be exclusive to Switch forever, Pokemon Legends Arceus. And this game did a great job of kind of mixing up the tried and true Pokemon formula rather than being like, oh, you got to go from gym to gym and like battle all these gym leaders like every other like mainline Pokemon game. This actually takes you back in time and you're going through a developing region and you're basically creating that region's first Pokédex. So you're going around discovering like the different Pokemon of the region, and like there's all these like early era Pokemon technology, like the Pokeballs are like steam powered, which is hilarious. So it's like and like it's the first attempt at like an open world style experience. Like Pokemon Sword and Shield had the wild area, which was kind of open world, but it was just like a big hub essentially. Pokemon Legends Arceus was like the one that made it so that like, okay, this is just this big open area. You can go and do anything and you can like stealthily sneak up on these Pokemon. There are boss battles in this where it's like you are just fighting a crazed wild Pokemon that and
Like a raid boss or something.
it's not even like you don't even use your Pokemon to battle them. It's like action-based battles where like you have these orbs that are you have to throw at them to calm them down as they attack you, and you have to avoid their attacks. So it's and I mean there are traditional Pokemon battles in there that are turn-based battles, but Pokemon Legends Arceus has me so hyped for Pokemon Legends ZA because that's the true successor to this game. And after Scarlet and Violet, which again I will say is a very good Pokemon game, it just plays like garbage. And I'm hoping that Switch 2 actually gets like an updated version of Scarlet and Violet.
I completely agree on that. Like, I also love Legends Arceus. That would have been like a runner up on my list. But Scarlet and Violet is like one of the few games where I would love to play it more, but the performance is so bad that it actually gives me headaches whenever I play it for an extended period of time.
And there's one section in Scarlet and Violet where you go out into the middle of the water, and like that's like where you're supposed to go. So it's not like I was going off the map. Like I was following the main mission, mainline story mission, and you go out into the middle of the water. And I guess there's something about the rendering of the water that made it so like it basically became a slideshow. And again, this
Yeah.
is pre-release, so they've probably patched this to an extent. But
No.
I mean, they've to an extent because I
Yeah.
have gone back and when they released the DLC, I was trying to play through
Yeah.
that, and I was like, man, this is still really bad shape.
Yeah.
So I would love, and I mean, it was notoriously bad because Nintendo actually had to put out a statement saying like, we take our quality seriously, and this like was not up to our standards. And it's like, oh wow, that's rough when like, it's an exclusive game and you're putting out that statement.
Yeah.
So Pokemon Legends Arceus is the best Pokemon game on Switch, and that's why it gets a spot on this because it's really a great game. And it does have some performance issues. It doesn't run like smooth as silk by any stretch, but it's a lot better than Scarlet and Violet
Yeah,
was.
9 day difference.
hmm Number two, I mentioned this game already, Persona 5 Royal. It is my second favorite RPG of all time, and the only RPG that's better than it is my number one, which we're going to get to in a second. This was the game that made me say, I need to go back and play Persona 4 Golden because now I know I love these games. And I've played through this game, which is anywhere between 110 and 130 hours. I've played through it twice. I played vanilla, and then
Oh
I
wow.
played and reviewed Persona 5 Royal when it came out in 2020. And the joke I always say is I was reviewing it, so I was like, on a tight deadline. I was neglecting all of my social responsibilities, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna just go out and like hang out with all my friends when I'm finally finished this review. And then like a few days before I finished this review, COVID hit, and I was social distancing for like an entire month before everybody else was. So Persona 5 Royal, well worth it. One of the best RPGs I have ever played, and now that it's finally on Switch, you should play it as well if you haven't already. And the epilogue is phenomenal. The epilogue that they added for Persona 5 Royal, that version specifically, is awesome, and they added a bunch of new character missions that are for some of like the side characters that really flesh them out and give you a lot of added context for who these characters are and make it so that some of the later story beats really hit a lot harder. So definitely recommend playing Persona 5 Royal. And then my number one of all time, Final Fantasy X 10-2 HD. Final Fantasy X, my favorite RPG of all time, my favorite Final Fantasy game of all time, and it's my third favorite game overall of all time. So, fantastic story. It really was kind of the pinnacle of RPGs at the time. It redefined what the Final Fantasy franchise was in PS2. It was the reason that I wanted a PS2 because I was at a friend's house and they broke this out after we were like, playing football outside. We came in, he's like, "Hey, you got to check out this game that I got." And it was like, the first Aeon summon. And I was like, "Oh my God, this is like mind blowing." And then like, I was in high school when it hit. So I'm playing through it and like my mind is getting blown at every plot twist and turn. Some of them are, kind of tropes at this point, but back then it was absolutely incredible to like see this story unfold. The visuals, even in the HD version, you can tell this is a game from over 20 years ago, but they still hold up remarkably well in a lot of places. And if you're a turn-based RPG fan, this, in my opinion, is the best turn-based RPG system that I've ever played. So that is my definitive ranking list. We didn't have any overlap whatsoever, which is
Yeah, I'm surprised about
pretty
that.
crazy.
Yeah.
But I like it like that. I like it that way. It's cool when like it's like, okay, we four of our entries are the same, but it's also cool in a completely different way when we have 10 completely different entries in our lists.